Friday, better.
It's an
Well, I
hour.
mean, I'm gonna take my time, pick a bucket too.
He's coming.
You could be busy most of those things.
He's coming around. He's going to say.
I know how to roast them. It's a Friday.
All right, Danny's here, so we can get started.
At least it's not me this time. It's all good. I do the best.
But if you want work half a day or something.
Yeah.
All right, we are in Matthew chapter 14.
Right,
Friday.
yes.
Matthew chapter 14. We are at verse 13.
You not think we finished, Matthew?
Did you finish Matthew while I was not there?
But we can review today.
Yeah, we're all done. We pretty much did the entire gospel. We're done.
All right, very good.
And Revelation.
Yeah, thanks to Hugh for stepping in for a couple of weeks. I really appreciate it. It's very comforting to have Hugh there and count on him to take care of you guys while I'm out gallivanting. So I really appreciate it. All right, so Matthew chapter 14, verse 13. We have the story here of the feeding of the 5,000. This is the big one. This is the big deal miracle for Jesus. This is the only miracle that's actually recorded by all four Gospels. And unfortunately for you, we're going to look at all four Gospels this morning to get the full story, because each of them have kind of a little different take on it, which is nice. There's some additional details that they bring. So this is the point in Jesus' ministry where his popularity kind of reaches its peak. We'll see at the end, they even tried to make him king when they finished this feeding. But it also therefore marks the beginning of his withdrawal from the crowd. I mean, up to this point, he's been drawing a crowd, right? It's been the miracles and a lot of people coming. Crowd's been following him around. We'll see this giant crowd here really marks the beginning of him really focusing down on the disciples. It's also, remember, right? It's right after John the Baptist has been killed, right? And so he focuses now his time on the disciples after this feeding of the 5,000. The other thing just to remember up front is that this feeding of the 5,000 in and of itself is a teaching for the disciples. And after we go through the details, we're going to wrap back at the lessons that the disciples, and therefore us, should have taken away from what happens here with the feeding of the 5,000. All right, so let's go right into it in verse 13. And we ended here last time. We'll pick up here this time. When Jesus heard of it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. When the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. So again, this is a verse that has a lot more detail in the other places, and so we'll be turning there in a minute. But first of all, when he says when he heard it, when Jesus heard it, what is it that he heard? Yes, Tracy, you can put your mic on. You can say it out loud.
John the Baptist.
Yeah, right. He hears that John the Baptist has been killed. And he also hears that Herod believes that he's John the Baptist resurrected, right? I mean, all that, he has heard all that now. And, certainly that message is going to get back to Herod, right? That people saw Jesus as this potential political leader. He's drawing these big crowds. He's doing miracles. He's healing people all over the place, right? And so part of his withdrawing here, part of his getting away was getting away from Herod. He knew that his time had not yet come, as we'll see in other places, right? And so he withdraws. One of the reasons is just to get away from Herod. Herod wanted, if you remember from last time, Herod wanted to have an audience with him, and he did not want to have an audience with Herod. So at this point, I'm going to start looking at the other Gospels, and let me just say, if you want to travel with me, that's fine. If you don't want to travel with me and just listen, that's fine too. There's a couple places where I'll say, please turn, because I want you to see what's there. But just for your reference, we're going to be going to Mark chapter 6, Luke chapter 9, and John chapter 6 for the other renditions of this miracle. So first of all, in Mark chapter 6, verse 30, and I'm going to just read them, and if you want to keep up with me, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. Mark chapter 6, verse 30 says, "Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught." So the other thing to just recognize is that there's a confluence of events that's going on here. We had the murder of John the Baptist, right? He's certainly bringing them that news. But the other thing is that Jesus had sent them out on missionary journeys. They had gone out to spread the gospel, to heal the sick all by themselves. And at this point in time, they're coming back from those and bringing back the information on what happened. So when it says there, both what they had done and what they had taught, this was, letting him know what they were up to. And then in verse 31, it said, "And he said to them, 'Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest for a while, for there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat.'" Right. So in Matthew, it says that he went to a deserted place. Here it adds the additional information that the disciples are actually with him. And it's interesting at the end there, right? There were many coming and going. In other words, there was a big crowd, and they did not even have time to eat. So it's interesting that the disciples, Jesus, are all hungry as we get into this miracle of him feeding the 5,000. Let's go back to Matthew a minute. Well, let's see. Just want to get, I guess I need to show you the other things. In Luke chapter 9, I'll just add that it says in Luke chapter 9 that they actually went to Bethsaida, and I mentioned this last time. Bethsaida is actually means town of fish, or a fish town. And of course, around the Lake of Galilee, there were several fish towns. There were actually several Bethsaidas, but this one has been particularly identified as the one on the northeast of the lake. So they are in Capernaum on the northwest of the Lake of Galilee. They, as it says in Matthew, they got in a boat. They went across the lake to Bethsaida on the northeast of the lake. And then finally in John chapter 6, in verse 30, verse 3, John chapter 6, verse 3, what? In Luke 9, it was verse 10, if you wanted that one. In John, it's chapter 6, verse 3. It says, "And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover feast of the Jews was near. Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip," et cetera, et cetera. But the point I want you to get here is Jesus crosses the lake. He goes up on the mountain and he sits down with his disciples. He lifts up his eyes and he sees this great multitude coming toward him, right? Now let's go back to Matthew chapter 14, because at the end of verse 13, again, it says, well, first it says he departed there by boat, as I mentioned, to a deserted place. So this is, again, in Bethsaida, up on the mountain. But then it says, "But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities." So Jesus and the disciples have crossed over the lake from the northwest to the northeast. But this crowd actually is following him by going around the lake on foot. So look at Mark chapter 6 again in verse 33. It says here, "But the multitude saw them departing. Many knew him and ran there on foot from all the cities. And some arrived before them and came together to him." So here you see the multitudes, again, they leave by boat. The multitude starts running around the north side of the lake. And as they do, they're running through the little towns. They're telling people what's going on. Jesus is going across the lake, and we're following him. They pick up people. They pick up a crowd. And by the time they get to the other side, they have quite a crowd there. One more thing then back in John. I know I'm flipping, but I told you I would. In John chapter 6, verse 2, it says, then a great multitude followed him because they saw his signs, which he performed on those those who were diseased. So this is telling you again why this crowd is following him. They're following him because of the signs. They're following him because of the miracles, right? Jesus is drawing a crowd because of the miracles, because he's healing people, because of what is going on. So again, as we talked about the soils, these are the shallow soil ones, right? These are the ones on the rock. These are the thrill seekers. They're just there for the miracles. So the majority of the crowd, now of course not all the crowd, there were disciples amongst the crowd, but the majority of the crowd are these shallow soil kind of people. Now, while we're in John, I do want you to turn to John now, to John chapter 6, and see this interaction that we began to read it a few minutes ago. So Jesus, again, the sequence of events here is important to get the whole message. So Jesus is up on the mountain in a deserted place by himself. He looks over the hill, if you will, and he sees this crowd coming to him. And then in John chapter 6, verse 5, that's where we are, it says, then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread that these may eat? So he plants this question in Philip's mind. Now, in verse 6, we begin to get the answer from Philip. I think that there's actually a break in what happens here. I think he's up there because the answer really comes when he's down with the multitude, which really occurs later. So first of all, they were up on the mountain by themselves with the disciples. He sees the crowds coming, and he says to Philip, hey, what are we going to do? Where can we buy some bread for these? Now, anybody remember why he asks Philip from our study of the disciples a couple months ago? Anybody remember why?
He's the loggy.
He was the what?
The loggy.
I'm sorry, what's a loggy?
I thought he was the logistician.
He was kind of a logistician, yes. He was also probably the one responsible for the food. And then finally, maybe most importantly, he's from this area. He's from Bethsaida. He and Andrew both would know where the food would be in this area, right? So when Jesus turns to him and says, hey, where can we get some food here? Now that we're hanging out here in Bethsaida, it would be very logical for him to ask Philip and Andrew, who were from that area. All right. Now I actually want to go back to Matthew again and pick up the story there in verse 14. So he plants this question in Philip's mind, and then in verse 14 it says, and Jesus went out, and when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion for them, and he healed their sick. So in verse 14, when it says, and when Jesus went out, most of the commentaries agree this is when he left that private place, that place that he was with the disciples, when he went out to the multitude. Now, it could be that he was up on the mountain and he came down to where the people were. And for those of you who remember, have studied this before, at Bethsaida there was a lot of area where the sheep would graze. There was a lot of pasture land, and there was a lot of open fields. And so very, very likely what he's talking about here is he came down from the mountain down to this area where the crowds were gathering down in this pasture land kind of area. He leaves the solitude to actually minister now to this crowds. I mean, notice what it says. He was moved with compassion, right? He feels the hurt of these people, even though he knows they're shallow soil, right? He knows they're there only for the miracles. At the same time, it broke his heart for the issues that they had, right? For the sicknesses, for the diseases, for the lack of spiritual awareness. All those things broke his heart, and as a result, he leaves the solitude with the disciples. He leaves what his plan was, right? Which was really to get some rest, to get a little break, to teach the disciples, and he comes down here because of compassion, because of his heart. He comes down here to heal these that are in that area. Now, again, in Mark chapter 6, one other thing it says, just reading this verse 6:34, Mark 6:34 says, and Jesus, when he had come out, he saw a great multitude, was moved with compassion for them because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. And so he began to teach them many things. So what we have between Matthew and Mark is he leaves again the comfort and the quiet with the disciples. He goes down to the multitude, he teaches them, and he heals them, right? Which is the ministry that he has had all along, teaching and healing, teaching and healing. Although he had, his desire was for a break, for a rest, he responded in compassion to these people. So I do have to just pause here for a minute and just say, what would our response have been in this particular situation, right? He's just heard that John the Baptist has been killed. He gets in the boat with the disciples to get away from the crowd that he's been ministering to there in Capernaum. He gets to the mountain. He has a little bit of time with the disciples, and then the crowd comes again. I think if it was me, I would have hid in the trees, right? I'm too tired. I'm overloaded. I'm frustrated. I'm annoyed that they have come and followed me again. We get so focused on ourselves that we miss ministry opportunities. Jesus did not, right? He saw a ministry opportunity where he could teach, where he could heal. And even though it would have been easy for him in his human side to focus on himself and what he needed and what his disciples needed, he saw the ministry opportunity. And I'm afraid we don't do that. We get so focused on what I need, what's important for me, make sure I get my needs met, make sure I'm okay, make sure I'm not put in an uncomfortable situation. I'm too tired. I don't feel like it. I'm frustrated. Blah, 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 whatever the things are. We miss ministry opportunities. We miss the chance to touch someone. So that's just a little lesson snuck in the middle. We'll get to more lessons at the end, but don't miss that one. All right, let's keep going. Verse 15. So verse 15, when it was evening. So just to point out again, he goes in the boat and he gets across the river and across the lake, and he has this little quiet time, and then he goes and ministers to the crowds all day. Okay, all day long he is teaching, he is healing the crowds that have run around the lake and have joined him down in the plains. So that's where we are. So when it was evening, the disciples came to him saying, this is a deserted place. The hour is already late. Send the multitudes away that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food, right? So this is their solution. This is their answer. As we see it, we saw in John a minute ago, when Jesus asked the question to Philip, it was a test. He said it was a test for him to see how he would respond. This is them failing the test and saying, hey, I know what we can do. Let's just get rid of all these people. Let's send them away. This is too much. We're tired. We're hungry. We certainly don't want to deal with all these people. Let's send them away into the villages in order to get their food. Again, this is them saying, God, remove this burden from me. God, I can't deal with this right now. Take it away. I don't want to deal with these people, right? I can't handle it right now. This is the disciples' solution. Verse 16. But Jesus said to them, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. This is Jesus with a gut punch to the disciples, right? No, you're not going to send them away. I want you to give them food. He wants them to face the fact that they have no way to do this. They have no resources. They have no way of solving this problem on their own, right? What's interesting, if we go back, just go back to John chapter 6. In fact, I want you to turn there, go to John chapter 6, because we want to pick up the story about Philip there. John chapter 6, remember we said, verse 5, when Jesus lifted up his eyes, seeing the great multitude, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread that we may eat? And then verse 6, as I've said, but this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Jesus knew what he would do. This was not like, oh, gee, what are we going to do? I got to figure this out, right? No, he knew what he would do. The only reason he asked this question of Philip is to test him. And Philip then has all day to think about it. What are we going to do? And what does Philip do? He counts the money. All right, look at verse 7. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that everyone may have, any of them may have a little. So Philip goes back, he counts the money, he does the calculation. Hey, even if we use all the money that we have, we're not going to have enough bread to feed all these people. And so, he gets together with the disciples and they come to Jesus and say, hey, let's send all these people away. We don't have enough money. It's just not sufficient in order to do this. So, yeah. By the way, they're hungry themselves, right? We don't have the money. We don't have the bread. In fact, what do we have? Oh, let's see. We got this kid here says he's got a couple of loaves and some fish, right? Verse 7, Peter answered, 200 denarii. And then verse 8, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is this lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many? 5 barley loaves. So barley was the cheap wheat in those days, very coarse, kind of, hard bread. 2 small fish, very likely, just salted fish. Again, 2 small salted fish. What are they among so many? Send the people away. This is where the disciples were. And Jesus says, no, I want you to feed them. He's trying to get them to see, again, their own inadequacy. Because they're coming to him saying, we don't have the money. We don't have the food. We can't do anything about this, Jesus. And Jesus is saying, no, I want you to feed them. So Jesus at this point has got them right where he wants them, right? Right where they're primed to understand the lesson, where they are saying to themselves, I don't have it. I can't get it. I can't do anything about it, right? Not, oh, I think we can fix this. Oh, I think we can solve this somehow. No, they knew they could not do it, particularly when Jesus said, no, I want you to feed them. I think they're all just looking at each other and going, what? How can we feed them? There's no way that we can feed them. It never crossed their minds that Jesus could or would do something, right? That never crossed their minds. They had seen miracle upon miracle upon miracle at this point, right? They'd seen people healed, seen people raised from the dead. They'd seen demons being taken out. But when they get to this very personal situation, they couldn't see they couldn't see how Jesus had anything to do with this. This was about food. This was about how are we going to feed these people. This is not about a healing or something. That's what Jesus does. So again, this is us, is it not, right? It never crossed their mind that Jesus could step in and do something in their situation, in their problem, in the situation that they were in the middle of. No matter how, and so for us, no matter how many times God meets our needs, every day, every year, all the time, we still wonder, is he going to meet our current needs? Is he going to meet me in my current problem, in my current situation, in the current thing that I'm going through? And that's exactly where the disciples are. They did not connect what God's faithfulness in the past with the problem that they had in front of them. Right? Shake your heads up and down. Okay, so I know you're still hearing me. All right, good. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 14, and what I think is the most dramatic and important verse in this lesson, and it may be one of the littlest ones. It's verse 18. He said, "Bring them here to me." Right, in verse 17, they said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish," and Jesus says, "Bring them here to me." Right? Bring what you have to me. Bring the little that you have and bring it to me. Bring all the resources that you have. Oh yeah, it's not much. And bring it to me. Why? Because with me, all things are possible. Right? And this is where Jesus starts to turn to the disciples and say, no, you need to take anything that you have, you need to give it to me, and then something can happen. You need to give up on yourselves. Well, yeah, you found 2 little fish and 5 loaves of bread. Yeah, try to feed 5,000 people with that. No, you need to give up. Give up on your own resources. Give them to me, and then I can do something. And so I would let me just pause here and ask this question. What does Jesus want us to bring to him so that he can do what he needs to do?
Faith.
Can you speak louder?
Faith.
Faith? Yes.
Everything. Everything.
Everything? Yes. Specifically?
Everything. It kind of encompasses everything, right?
Our mind,
Yeah. Our hearts.
our mind,
Our mind, our heart,
Your
Ourselves.
possession.
ourselves, our talents,
almost everything.
our inadequacies,
Time.
our stupidness,
Time.
our clumsiness, our sinfulness, right? We're to bring it all to him, and then he can. We're to bring all of our stuff to him, and then he can. And I think that's exactly what he's saying to these guys here. Bring me the stuff. Bring me what you got, and then I can do something. Stop counting on yourselves. Stop counting on your ability to do this. I want to feed these people through you. I don't want you to feed these people, right? He's trying to get that message across. They don't get it yet, but they're trying to get that message across to them, even by asking them for the fish at this point. All right. Verse 19. Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke it, gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the multitudes. So again, there's some cool pictures in the other scriptures. So in Mark chapter 6 again, in verse 39, and unfortunately the English here ain't so good. In 6:39 it says, then he commanded them and make them to sit down in groups on the green grass, and they sat down in ranks, in hundreds and in 50s. The picture here, the words that he uses where he says sit down in groups, the word that's used there is the same word used for garden plots, right? He has them sit down in the groups that are like a garden plot. So there's this picture, if you had a drone above this whole crowd, he separates them into groups of 50 or 100, like garden plots. You see all their colorful dress in these garden plots. And it's this beautiful picture of the people laid out, because they're reclining, right? When they eat, they're reclining on the green grass. This beautiful picture of them in groups of 50s and hundreds, very orderly, so that he can understand how many are there, so that they can, in a very orderly way, feed them. But it's also a beautiful picture, right? This kind of this garden bed that is laid out of the people that Jesus here is going to bless and going to provide this miracle to. So back in Matthew then. So the first thing he does is he blesses the food, right? He again getting the people to focus on the Father. This is what is about to happen. Is a focus on what God can do. He breaks the bread, he breaks the fish, and he gives them to the disciples. Now, I don't know how he does this. This is the miracle part, right? Are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, my screen has frozen. Am I frozen?
We hear
No,
you.
The
You
screen.
hear me? Okay, let's just keep going. This screen's kind of funky, but let's keep going if you can hear me. So he breaks the bread and he gives them to the disciples. So in order to, so he's got 5 loaves of bread and he's got 12 disciples. So as he's doing this, he is creating new bread, right? He is creating new fish in order to pass them out to the disciples. So right in front of the disciples here, we see Jesus as the creator. Now you can go to John chapter 1, verse 3, right, where it talks about all things came into being through him, right, where he is talked about as the creator God. But here the disciples are actually seeing creation happen right in front of them. Now, what's interesting is you think about these fish. One of the commentaries was like, well, did he create the fish already dead? And already salted, or did he create them as live fish and then kill them and then salt them and then give them to life? I don't know how the thing happened, but he creates this food right there in front of the disciples such that they all have food then to take out to the people. Then you got to think, okay, how did they? All right, we're going to get to the end. We're going to see this 5,000 men, right? 5,000 men, probably 5,000 or more women, because there were, from all the stories, there were more women that followed him than men. And then children. In those days, nobody had one child, right? This was a large group of large families. So there could be 25,000 people in this crowd that he is ministering to. Now, can y'all still hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. I'm gonna keep going. There's probably 25,000 people. So you got 12 disciples and the 25,000 people. Each of them got to feed 2,000 people. So I don't think Jesus gave them the food for 2,000 people for them to drag down the mountain, right? He gave them a basket of food, unlike the basket that he had with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. They had to go to their groups of 50, groups of 100, whatever. And probably, at the end of the row, he gave it to one person. He gave a basket with some fish. He handed a loaf to somebody. He broke it in half, handed a loaf to somebody. They all of a sudden had a whole loaf. They broke it in half, handed it to somebody. They all of a sudden had a whole loaf. I mean, I just see this miracle reproducing over and over and over throughout the crowd. They're seeing creation happen. The people are seeing creation happen right in front of them, because it's not like you're going to drag 2,000 people's worth of food around, right? It's got to be created over and over and over. The disciples are creating. The disciples in the crowd are creating as Jesus's power gets passed out through them. So the magnitude of this miracle is just overwhelming when you think about it that way. That this creation is going on and going on and going on and going on as these 25,000 people are fed. Any thoughts on that before I go forward? You got that picture? I can't see your head, so somebody say something.
Yeah.
You got it. Okay, good. All right, let's go on to verse 20 then. So verse 20, so they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of the fragments that remained. So they all ate and were filled. They were all satisfied. They all got what they needed. They all got enough. They all had plenty. They all were filled. And then there were 12 basketfuls left over, right? We started out with one tiny basket. We ended up with 12 basketfuls. By the way, these baskets, you might say, where do baskets come from? Typically, when people in that area were going on a journey, they would carry a basket with them for food. Now, this is not a huge Easter basket, right? This is a small pouch-like basket that they would carry as a satchel, if you will. So this is the kind of baskets that we're talking about. Whoa. Are you still there?
Yes.
Yes. We're here. Man, just
Are
like
you
you.
still here? No?
Now we're not here. Now you're not there.
Not his best shot.
You got this.
Yeah.
Lost sync on the satellite.
Is he still talking through us?
Can you guys hear me?
There you go.
Probably a problem with Rich's system.
Oh, I thought that-
Sometimes they leaving
Texting
or something.
Are you texting Russ?
Yeah.
I'm texting.
No.
Tell him repeat his last 5 minutes.
Look who's teaching now.
All right, you.
Finish it up. Finish it
And
up.
then,
XO takes over.
He has to build the screen up.
Start with prayer requests.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're at the counter.
I don't know, Patty, should we exit too? It looks like Rich exited the meeting.
I think we're fine. I think maybe he's trying to restart to rejoin the meeting.
Okay. All right.
We just look at each other. He's trying to get back on.
You can take from our house, it's quite a journey, isn't it?
Technology is wonderful as long as it works.
Yeah, that's why we were like, "You're coming over all the way from Michigan." Yeah, I was shocked too. Saying how far it is where he is. Surprised that night he came, but I'm I think they come over to. I usually don't forget it. Yeah, so maybe they were, I don't know, but they might normally.
They were driving back, but they were coming that next weekend or something. They were gonna be back again for Kevin. Yeah, so they said they're kind of used to it because they come so much.
There's no
together.
fear.
Yeah.
Like, well, they don't
Kevin's
bring
got
them to
3
y'all or
babies.
whatever. She's like,
Well,
nope, they have to be in bed at 6:30.
Yeah, with 3 kids.
Yeah, Kevin's
He's got
got
her in bed
3.
early. Yeah.
Kevin.
Really lost whatever.
Mine was been accessible when they were little. So they were, but they were
It
not.
was something crazy.
Your little dudes, when do they go to bed?
Yeah, but I mean, she's got.
We don't
young-
even get home till 10.
Oh, my. Oh, yeah.
We're heading to Busch Gardens and Howell Springs today.
Are you really?
We'll get home a little earlier because
Yeah, you were on the go all the time,
All
but it's fun stuff.
She wouldn't know what to do.
That's
true.
go crazy.
It's fun stuff that.
You'd have to have Curtis tell you about his day. You sit around and ask Curtis tell you about his day. Once you get,
Still works.
so Callum, in his bed, he said,
Oh, tell you about it.
I want to tell you about my day.
Delayed going to sleep. That's
Oh,
it.
I thought you got Curtis.
I did.
You
I
did.
said if you had nothing to do, you'd have to sit around and let Curtis tell you
Oh,
about his
that's right.
day.
That's where, yeah,
What's your good day, Curtis?
yeah.
Yeah, I was in Carolina. I didn't get home till like 10:30 last night. And had gone to shopping.
Oh, fun for yourself. and your
Yeah,
cousin.
for me, I told you I was gonna do it though. She waited for years. I finally.
So did
got
you
stuff.
did.
But it's gonna take 6 months.
Oh,
to get here.
okay.
First said, I need to paint again by then. I said, yeah, probably.
So you get furniture for
The den.
The den.
Yeah, we got the dining room, and that was delivered and stuff.
Oh, you already had gotten that.
Recently.
Okay.
Saturday while I was home, they brought the buffet server piece. I said, Kurt, you not gonna believe this?
It was that nice.
The door, there's a gap, you know, and he was like, yeah. I was like, as particular as you are, and you're the wood person and all.
Yeah.
He's like, listen, I signed that it was okay. I said, I don't care what you signed.
Yeah.
So I will call them Monday morning and they can come back out here. Kurt said it might just be that the floors need to be adjusted. So I said, you know what?
So did you get a table?
I got a table and chairs.
The buffet service. Yeah, so where did you get that from?
In Carolina.
Oh, you got that there too.
That took me 4 months.
Wow.
She's been doing there.
I got them, yeah. Oh, I didn't bring my phone in here.
So what style did you?
I got different styles. This designer that worked with me said, don't be all matchy matchy. Okay. So this couch is kind of, Kurt really likes the electric. He loves that feature. Because Greg and Brenda have, he's like, I like this.
He knows the problem and is fixing it.
And I decided to chase all night. Because when I get up in the mornings, I go to the bed with my back hurts so bad. I go to bed and I'm sitting to the bed board. Yeah. How can I do that? You know, so I would have to go to bed.
Joe said he's rebooting and he knows the problem and is fixing it.
So I, last minute decision, I decided to chase on one hand and mine on the other. There's a big, so it.
Yeah.
To that, like, walk around everything that there's wall. Especially right all that things there.
Letters.
And then.
Slow, but coming up now.
Because all the seating area. Yeah. Then I ordered that big storage piece.
You got lots of people to going in there.
And I said, well, I'm here, I might as well get going.
I did last upgrade, what, 20 years ago?
Ours was a long time. Ours was a long time.
I told my cousin, I said, well, I just turned 63 and I've only bought furniture one time. So this will be here when I die.
That's the way we look at it too.
I mean, it will. I hate to.
So you did the dining room one time, then you went back and you had the rest of the stuff.
Debbie enjoys it.
Yeah, I thought I would, but it's just.
It's a lot.
Yeah, I like this. Yeah, I see this style. Then I see this style, I'm like, that's like that.
So we just went and did some,
Too many choices.
we just went and did some sofa thing and then stuff in the front of the house, but we went all day looking around and I just said, I'm not satisfied. I'm just not, I'm trying to communicate something I want in my head and nobody's. And then finally I was like, why am I going to pictures? And I just typed in what I was thinking. And then there's the pictures, your style. So I just started saving one. That way I can say, this is what I'm thinking, and I'm able to go, this is, you know, but it took me a day of, because I said, I can't. I'm not seeing it.
They helped me do.
But that helps me.
Printed this, she printed this out.
That way
We didn't go with that.
the color.
Starting a different.
But that's in a whole nother story.
No, by the time he gets his computer stuff back up, it'll be 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Are hard. Yeah, anyway, when I was getting the cream.
Oh.
Sectional, that was
Uh-huh.
Was it puffy? That don't like
He
puffy.
kept pointing out that I'm not getting puppy there yet. Compare, it's not puppy.
Yay.
Yeah.
It's bad.
He said, got it. There it is.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, welcome.
Gotcha.
Welcome
All right,
back.
can we finish this? We're nearly done, so I want to go ahead and try to finish it if we can.
We'll see.
You all okay?
Yeah.
Good.
Wow,
Right.
that's something day.
Let's see, where were we? 5,000, 10,000, 16,000 people.
First 20 left over.
25.
I felt very.
Look at the wrong computer. I got, I think I'm gonna have to buy a new computer for Christmas. Early, yeah. Anyway, so 12 baskets left over. Why 12 baskets? 12 disciples, right? Finally, they get to eat. They ministered, Jesus has them minister to the people first, and then they get to eat, right? They don't get to have the private time with Jesus. They don't have to, get the special teaching up in the quiet place. But he has taught them this lesson in front of the whole crowd. He has taught them this lesson with the crowd. And as a result, they get their food at the end after they have finished ministering. So again, verse 21 says that they have 5,000 men besides women and children. So again, I'm guessing 25,000 or so people, very likely at this point that we're talking about. Now let's keep going though, because there's a couple more things that we need to pull out. Look at verse 22. We start beginning the next miracle, but verse 22, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into a boat and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. So it's interesting. He feeds this group, and then he has the disciples leave, get in a boat and go. And then look at verse 23. It says, and when he sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now, when evening came, he was alone there. So Jesus, after this miracle, he sends the crowds away. He sends the disciples away, and then he goes up on the mountain. So to understand what's going on here, we really need to go back to John again for one last time. In John chapter 6, verse 13 and following, John 6:13 says, therefore he gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. And then verse 14, then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, this is truly the prophet who is come into the world. So a great, so the people who saw the miracle, the people who understood it, understand that this is the prophet, this is the Messiah, this is the one who's come into the world. And then look at verse 15. Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and make him and take him by force to make him king, they departed again to the mountain by himself alone. So this is the other little piece of information as to why what's going on is going on. The crowd starts saying, hey, if this guy can heal people, if he can heal the sick, if he can raise people from the dead, and then if he can provide us all with food, what an army he could have, right? What a political leader he could be. Let's make him king. He can provide us all with food. He can heal of all of our sicknesses. This would be a great leader that we could have. So this again is the shallow soil people, right? They're responding from their gut. They're responding, hey, it'd be great to have food like this all the time. We don't have to go back to fishing, right? I mean, it's just an amazing response that they have, that they try to make him king at this point. So finally, Jesus does go up into the mountain. He finally gets the rest that he's talked about. Of course, that rest is not long-lived, as we'll see next time when the disciples end up out in the middle of the lake. All right, so I do want to, and because of time, I'll just kind of rattle these off, kind of the lessons from this lesson, the things that the disciples should have learned from what went on. First of all, as we said in the beginning, he kind of showed them that they needed to withdraw from needless danger, right? It was not his time to interact with Herod, and so they really needed to withdraw. He didn't need to step into a situation between him and Herod. He didn't go to Herod's shop to confront him. Instead, he steps away. The second thing is, there are times when you need rest. There are times when you need solitude. There are times when you have to get away from the crowd. There are times when you've got to spend time with those who really do understand and really do get it and really are laboring with you, if you will, right? At the same time, you see here the heart of God in his compassion, right? You see the compassion and love of God as essentially he sacrificed his needs for the needs of others, for the needs that the crowd had, for his healing, for his word. He sacrificed his own needs for those. Again, demonstrating the heart of God to sacrifice for the needs of others. So, while he's meeting these physical needs, he's also teaching about the kingdom, right? He was both teaching and healing. If you remember, we've said it before, the healing was all about getting people to understand who he was so that they could grasp the teaching. It was really about what he was trying to get across to them. And you see that here. I think there's no question that he's trying to teach the disciples here to obey, even if they don't understand why. Right? They certainly did not understand, how he was going to feed these guys, how any of this was going to happen. But when he said to them, go and take the fish, break it, and feed the people, my guess is they're still going, what do you mean? I only got a couple of fish here. I only got a couple of breads here, even though they had just seen another miracle in front of them. But again, they had to obey in order to see what God was going to do. They had to obey in order to see what God was going to do. You also see God's demonstration of his own stewardship here. There's no waste, right? He makes all this food, but there was only enough for those who were there. It wasn't like there was a bunch of food that got left on the ground. It was only enough for those who were there, and then there was 12 baskets for the disciples. It shows kind of God's integrity, God's economy, if you will. At the same time, he's very generous in that he gives to all that they need. Everything is there. God's generosity is clearly here. The ministry is to provide for others, not for yourselves. They should have gotten that message. They didn't get anything to eat until everybody else was fed. And then there was plenty of food. But their ministry was really about others. They had to focus on others before they could get theirs. They had to focus on others before they could get theirs. They had to minister to others before God ministered to them. They had to learn, they had to learn to trust the power of God in a situation that seemed impossible, right? Again, I think Jesus had them right where he wanted them to learn this lesson that they had to trust him in a situation that seemed completely impossible. They had to trust the power of God. The other thing is that, again, it was very clear that this was the creating God. Right? This was the God who creates. This was the God who created the universe. This was God. This was Jesus was deity. If he could create bread, if he could create fish, if he could create all that food for all those people, he's the creator. Therefore, he is God. Therefore, he is deity. And then, begin with the little resources you have, right? God loves weak people who are fully turned over to him. And he wants you to give your little resources to him. This is not a tithing lesson, but this is about giving ourselves to him, all that we have, all that we are, such that God can do the stuff that he wants to do. The last thing I'd say is God wants to provide for people through you. You realize that the disciples stood between Christ and the multitudes, right? He used the disciples to feed the people. God's power, God's creative power went through the disciples to reach the people. God wants to provide for people through you. God wants his power to go through you to other people. That's the ones I got out of here. There's probably more, but those are the lessons I got as we went through here. Just, it's a, again, this is the big one. This is the big miracle. This is the climax of his miracles before we start getting into more detailed training of the disciples. All right. Any other thoughts on this? Any other lessons that you got before we jump to prayer requests? I do apologize for the unfortunate break there in the middle. It was a computer problem.
Yeah.
Joe's going to make me buy another computer. I know it.
He's gonna make.
Anything else before we break? All right, Hugh, I assume that you'll pray, but he's going to need some help getting prayer requests there in the room. Before we do, Joe, anything here?
Stop the recording.
Thank you.
Cheryl talking about. that man Jackson. I don't think they knew him.
So I don't know how many of you